Hi, now we are going to move on and discuss the last two groups of financial ratios, liquidity ratios and debt utilization ratios. So, liquidity ratios as a group, they show how the firm can meet each obligations or how quickly the business is able to liquidate its assets. And in general, bigger numbers show that the business is more liquid. This group of ratios is very important for bankers. For example, if you go out there and try to get approved for a loan, those are the ratios that the bankers, the financial providers, are going to take a look at, and they like to see bigger numbers, which means you are liquid, you are able to take on additional debt obligations, and you are able to pay it off. So let's see what ratios we have here. We have two liquidity ratios. One is called current ratio and is calculated as current assets versus current liabilities. This data is coming from the balance sheet for the business. So if you take a look at the data on the balance sheet, current assets are 800,000 divided by current liabilities 300,000. So current ratio is 2.67, which is above industry average, which is good, which means our business is more liquid. Any number above 1.5, it's pretty good, and the higher the better. Now, another liquidity ratio is called quick ratio, and from for this one we take out the inventory of 370,000 out of the current assets 800,000. We take out inventory, and then we divide by current liabilities, and this the ratio is 1.43, which is above industry average again. So a benchmark in general in finance textbooks for this quick ratio is 1. So any number higher than 1 is good. So for liquidity ratio as a group, our business performs better than industry average. Now, the last group of ratio is called debt utilization ratios. And we are going to see how much debt the business has on average related to its assets, how fast the business is able to cover its interest expenses or its fixed expenses. So we are going to calculate the first of this ratio is debt to total assets. Out of total assets, how much is the debt or liability, another word for debt. So for our business debt to total assets, the total liabilities, if you go back on the balance sheet, is 600,000 divided by total assets. So we have debt to total assets 37.5%, which is higher than industry average. Here we prefer to have a smaller number when it comes to debt. So smaller numbers would be better, but for in this case we have more debt than industry average. So our business is more leveraged. Why is that? Well, because we have more liabilities here, and if you look back on the balance sheet, what's this debt is consist of, we have let's see, out of 600,000 total debt, we have total liability 600,000, we have 50,000 accounts payable not too high, to 50,000 notes payable. So we owe money to financial providers, that's one reason. And then long-term liability, 300,000, half of total liability. We owe money to maybe bonds payable in the future. They don't say exactly what it is here. But those are the reasons, those two, why we have higher debt to total assets for our business here. Now going back to continue with debt utilization ratios. The next ratio is total interest earned, how quickly our business is able to cover its interest expenses. Interest, this refers to the expense, how much interest I pay on borrowed money. from the income statement. So my number is 11 times, 4 times higher than industry average, which is good. So I'm able to cover my interest expense. And fixed charge coverage, here 100,000 consists of this 50,000 interest and 50,000 lease expenses is explained here, lease payments. That's 100,000. 50,000 interest plus lease expenses. So fixed charge coverage is 6 times, which is above industry average. So that's good number. So for this group of ratios, out of 3, I do better on those 2. Here I am more leverage. I carry more debt than industry average. And now to wrap up, since we are done with all 4 groups of financial ratios, let's see the big picture for our business. Out of 13 ratios, we perform better on 10 of them. Just 3 of them are below industry average, and those are profit margin. We are slightly below 5 versus 6.7 because we had an extraordinary loss, if you recall. Then a second one that's slightly below average is fixed asset turnover because we had more fixed assets. And finally, we carry on more debt than other businesses in the industry. And this is how you have to analyze the business based on financial ratios. So in general, our business does much better than industry average with those few exceptions, which is good.